If you have a rigid mindset, there is fear behind it. If you have a belief system and you cannot have a conversation with someone who has an opposing viewpoint, there is fear behind that. I thought we would just sort of recap on the whole issue of what is meant by the third eye. What is it?
Yeah.
Because I think if you ask pretty much anybody, and you said the third eye, they would sort of know what is being meant in an odd sort of way. They wouldn't necessarily understand it, but they would have a sense of, it must be something to do with the mind, something to do with, I mean, what does it mean to you, the third eye?
The third eye is the seat of my soul. That's the way I see it, and it's a light, and it enables me to connect with myself and the universe. And through some practice, because I used to believe that I had to practice. I think there is some practice that is required, definitely. But with some practice, I've seen things that aren't every day. Yeah. And I think the first time I was experimenting that was about 21. And I got a book on how to actually do a third eye meditation. And that was quite amazing, because I felt for the first time this real lift of energy and this lightness and this love and nothing, but then being held and supported in this bright white light coming out. And then I left it for 5 years because I don't know, that's just didn't seem right, or
maybe it was too much for you at the time.
It was too much, yeah.
You weren't ready.
Because a friend of mine took me to I think it's the London Buddhist Centre. We did a meditation session. I fell over afterwards. I was drunk. I was intoxicated by, I don't know what, by myself, by the vibe of what was going on there, by the opportunity just to sit with myself. And it's only in my later years that I've kind of looked to develop that. And for me, sitting under a tree or being by a river is a beautiful thing. What I see, usually I get a kind of a purple glow. Sometimes I go off on a journey and I'm coming through a boat, or I see a track and I'm going down that, or there's times that I've visited sites of sacred religious importance around the world, and I've seen beautiful things just sat with my eyes closed. So there's definitely more to it than that, isn't there? There's much to explore.
Well, in terms of meat and two-veg sort of conversation, the third eye is the sixth chakra, and the upper chakras, they are from the heart upwards. They're not available when we are lost in ego. So if we're in a state of fear and anxiety, then our only considerations is survival, whether it's by ourselves or wanting to be part of a group. And so at that level, there is no consideration before the automatic behavior that we can all experience of being in the world. But people speak of their mind, but their mind is usually lower mind, is usually a mind that is to do with facts and figures and information that we've picked up in the world. So it's like sort of rote learning. But there is a higher mind, and the sixth chakra is part of this higher mind, and it can only truly be accessed when we have relaxed enough and we are able to connect with feelings rather than just be, I'll say the word, stuck in emotions. So there is the lower part of ourselves, which is all ego, and then there is the higher part from the heart upwards, which gives us potentially skills, abilities which are beyond the ego. And you can only access them if you've moved beyond the ego. And anyone can move beyond the ego. It's not like we're stuck in ego. We can move up and down. It's that flexibility that is missing for a lot of people, but nevertheless we can do so. And so the third eye is part of the higher mind. Most of us have an opportunity to experience something of what the third eye is capable of doing, but it's only the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I've got a whole lot of experiences in my life. I was training to be a healer in my mid-20s. And so I was putting a lot of effort into this, looking at people and seeing their auras, really allowing my imagination to really work for me. And there was one time when I went to this hippie encampment and I set up shop as a healer, free healing, anyone can come in.
I'm here to heal the world.
And there was this woman saying, I want some healing, fine, come into the tent. And I'm working my way through. I've got my hand is above her, in front of her, up the middle. And suddenly I can see this black ball. It's this solid black ball. Oh, that's interesting, that's curious. So as I move my hand, it comes with my hand. And by the time it reached her mouth, she had a huge emotional expression. Suddenly she's like, whoa, something came out of her. And I was looking at her in amazement and wonderment. And there was this sensation with me of longing of, God, I wish someone would do that for me. I would have loved someone to be able to do that to me. And that was an expression of my third eye, literally. That vision, I could see. My mind interpreted that as a black ball. There was another time in a group when we were doing a group healing, and I saw the Virgin Mary right there in the middle of the group with huge voluminous blue robes. And at the time I looked at that and don't question, accept. And then afterwards I asked the group leader, and he said, oh, you were interpreting what was actually going on. So the group were doing healing and they were sending out a protection field. And so my mind replayed that as the Virgin Mary, which is the mother that protects and takes care of. So imagination, so the third eye at one level is purely to do with imagination, allowing the imagination to do its own thing. Normally, we don't allow ourselves to have free thoughts, reverie, because you never know what's going to come out. I had a client a long time ago, and he told me the story how he was afraid for his sanity, because when he went down the road, he saw these young children, and he was seeing blood, and he was feeling angry, and he thought he was going mad. Well, after a little bit of therapy, it turned out that he was very angry with his wife, who was two-timing him. And there was all this repressed emotion.
Yeah.
And so when he was looking at these children, he was sort of triggering his own memory of his two children, his wife. And So the subconscious was speaking with him. It was sharing information. This is what's happening within you. But the subconscious speaks in a different language from the one that we normally have. And so if we're full of negativity, of suppressed emotions, then the subconscious is simply saying, look, all these books in the library are on the floor. They're all over the place. They need to be put in their proper place. They need to be sorted. Your emotions need to be sorted. There's these emotions, they're hanging about and they're creating havoc within you. So the subconscious is just expressing itself. And people can't deal with that. When people take LSD, people talk about having a bad trip. Well, what is a bad trip? The fact that you've got a lot of suppressed emotions which you are not at that, you don't have the resources to deal with at that moment in time. The LSD has opened Pandora's box. Anything in the subconscious is fair game. And now this suppressed emotions that come into the surface, all this imagery is coming through, and you're having a really bad trip. So at one level, the third eye tells us that it is really, really important to deal with all the belief systems and emotions which are stuck within us, which are not being dealt with, they're not being expressed, they're not being thought about, they're not being contemplated. So it forms it's a very valuable ability for human beings to manifest the imagination. I've met a number of people who have no imagination. I mean, it's not true, everybody's got imagination, but they have no imagination to the extent that they do not allow themselves free reverie thought. Whatever comes through to come through, because they are compelled to protect their mind from any thought or any emotion that might interfere with that. And because they're so censored, self-censored in that way, they have literally no imagination.
Sure.
So they're uncreative. They're, dare I say, now this is not a put down, but for me the concept of no imagination reminds me of civil servants. Okay, this is not a put down of civil servants, but it's that mentality where you have to go by the rules. Everything has to be ticked. There's no deviation, there's no joking, there's no laughing matter. It's like matter of fact. It's that sort of mentality which is extremely widespread in our society.
Yeah.
It's very, very common.
Bureaucratic thinking.
The bureaucratic, not necessarily, I'm not saying that people who work in bureaucratic jobs do not have access to their imagination, but when they're in bureaucratic mode work, that is how they're operating, like automatic machines, really.
And I guess it's also something you can control as well, isn't it? It's comforting. It feels quite safe, and there's a sense of achievement within that structure.
Well, there is, insofar as by obeying the rules, you're well within the group, within the herd.
Yeah. So
you're safe. When people move outside of the rules, there is a feeling of anxiety, because, you might be the one to get picked on. So we have this problem in our society, and it is very widespread, where we're raised to obey rules. Do as you're told. We've all had that, right?
Yeah.
I was a young lad. They used to cane me. The Catholic priest. I was 10 years old. The Catholic priest would come up and say, "Right, Salvador, the catechism. We had to learn the catechism. We had to learn it by rote. We have to be indoctrinated by it. Question number 5, because it's all in a series of questions and answers. So question number 5. So I had to be able to recite the question and the answer. And when I didn't, which was all the time, put your hand out, and he'd get a ruler, and he'd whack me. And all that did was really make me more and more obstinate, not to be indoctrinated, not to learn the rules. But this is what we do with children in different ways. I mean, that was an extreme way of indoctrination, but we do it in all schools. We do it in all homes. We indoctrinate our children to follow the rules. And you might say, well, it's important to follow the rules, otherwise there'd be chaos. But that comes from the place of an assumption that if people do not follow the rules, they're going to be raping, pillaging, just going crazy. And people do that. People do behave like that. But I would say that people behave like that precisely because they have been constrained and they have stopped them from being carefree, wholesome human beings. It's more complicated than that, but regardless, I mean, that's the principle behind it. Be that as it may, bearing in mind that we do live in a world which constrains our inner freedoms to conform. And we've seen this over the last few years, the need to conform is so great. The fear that it's, conformity always implies fear. And that's the dilemma, that if I teach you to follow the rules, why are you following the rules? Are you following them because of love? Nobody follows rules because of love. We follow rules because of fear. So there is the carrot and the stick. And all children and all adults who follow rules, they follow them because they are afraid. At one level, there's fear. There's a fear of a whole variety of reasons. Whether it's actual physical violence, whether it's been put away in prison, whether it's because someone will not like you, there's 1,000 reasons why you might not. At the end of the day, it's the same thing. It's fear. It's fear-based. So following the rules implies that there's fear. If you have a rigid mindset, there is fear behind it. If you have a belief system and you cannot have a conversation with someone who has an opposing viewpoint, there is fear behind that. If we talk about religion versus spirituality, the same thing. If you talk to me about the Bible and I talk to you about tarot cards, for the sake of argument, if you and I cannot have a conversation without demanding the other person is right or wrong, then we're both coming from a place of fear. So flexibility of thinking is really important, yeah?
Yeah.
Flexibility of thinking and flexibility of emotions. And so this is the bottom line. If we cannot have a conversation or shared experience with another person because our viewpoints are totally opposite, then something is not right. So imagination, really important, because it allows us to put ourselves in another person's shoes. At the very least, we can see the world from another person's perspective, and we can imagine what might be going on for them, rightly or wrongly. So imagination is really so central to being a human being. What do you think about what I've just said? How does that strike you?
Yeah, I mean, it really resonates. Yeah.
So Joshua and I watched the video earlier on, and it's in the article, and I will put a little bit of that after this. And we see young children who are trained from very early on to see the world blind. So literally they have a mask over their faces, and they can see what someone else is writing, they can see what someone else is drawing, they can see colors, they can see images around them. They are seeing with the inner eye. And this is imagination at another level.
I'm going to write something on this paper, and you'll tell me what I wrote, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here we go. It's gonna be one word.
Light.
That was so fast.
Can I write something?
Yes, you can. Actually, can I draw something and then you redraw it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. I don't know if you can tell what this is.
Car.
What? I didn't even point it at you yet.
When you define it like that, so.
Here you go.
It sounded like a Mercedes.
Yeah, you're right. It was a Mercedes.
Oh, yay! I'm the best at drawing cars. Number.
You're better than me.
I wouldn't say that.
Now you just need the windows. That's so cool. Okay, now let's do one for Sunny. Good job. That was amazing. You did it exactly. All right, Sunny.
I'm up for the challenge.
You're up for the challenge.
What was you drawing? I know what you're drawing.
Okay, show this to the camera.
What is
And now, what have I drawn?
a queen?
Okay. That was supposed to be hair, not a crown. But that could be a queen if you wanted to. Now, would you draw one right next to it?
I'm trying to drawing.
I can't get over how amazing this is. There you go.
I like
I'm looking at the faces of the crew, and all of them have their mouths open.
Is it imagination or is it visualization? Because this is always the difficult one, isn't it?
Okay.
Imagination, we then got to use discernment, because what am I imagining versus creating and picking up on?
Thank you, that's really important. Visualization, there are images that we create consciously from the world around us. Basically, from our library. We can look through the library, we choose the images. We control what we're seeing. Imagination is reverie, it's dreaming, it's the act of dreaming whilst awake. There are images that come to us unbidden from the subconscious. We don't choose it. So, you talked about being in nature earlier on. I've had experiences like this where I've been just sitting by the river, nice sunny day, the water is gurgling, boom, 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 and you sort of just lie back and enjoy. And before I know it, images from my past are beginning to surface, and they're doing their own thing. I'm not choosing images, I'm not choosing activity, but within that, there is an emotional context. And in fact, the last time that happened to me is a few years now. And what surfaced was to do with my mother, and then I sort of, in that sort of reverie, contemplating, and I got in touch with an emotion to do with her, and I started crying, and it was very intense, but it was very releasing.
Mm-hmm.
So, left to its own devices, our subconscious will generate whatever it is we need to process. and it will bring the images up.
Mm-hmm.
Not us. We don't choose the images. They arise into our subconscious in a dreamlike quality. Whereas with visualization, you're in control, you're rigid. Quite different.
Yeah.
Tarot card readers, for example, something I tried to learn, but I was never really very good at it. The process is that you learn a language or meanings, and then you allow the cards to come up, and then each card has got a meaning, but when you bring them all together, you are allowing your imagination to create a picture where it's not just a picture, it's actually a story that grows out of it. So it's an intuitive, and the you know, at one level, only the moment exists. Right now, this moment is all that exists, and everything is reflected continuously at this very moment. So the moment changes, but it's always the now moment. And within that, the whole universe is moving. Nothing is standing still. And so all manner of changes are occurring. And the tarot cards have just created a picture of a moment. And so with your imagination, if you have learned the language, you can look at that and you allow a story to grow out of that picture. And I have had tarot card readers be extremely accurate up to about 3 months. That's as far as they've gone, 3 months of accuracy. Beyond that, it all became very, you could still see, I mean, I would be told something would happen in 6 months, and 6 months down the line, I could see that. But it wasn't exact anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Different things had changed. The story had altered with time, but there were still elements of it. And so all of that is the power of the imagination, which we all have. What we saw in that video is our natural birthright,
Mm-hmm.
which is available to us if it's not bitten, destroyed, rigidified out of us, which is done in our culture. And we've all done it, and we will all do it to a greater or lesser extent, because this is not an overnight thing. This has been handed down through generations, and we're just sheep. We're part of the cycle. We're regurgitating a way of being in the world, and so we are like a virus infecting the next generation. So these children, they were separated, they were immunized beforehand, and so they were allowed to flower into the way that we could be. We can't. I mean, I can't for sure. I did ask Charlie when I saw that video. I said, "Oh, well, if I practice, could I be like that?" And he said, "No, you're damaged. You're too damaged. It will never happen." And that is the sad thing. It doesn't mean to say we don't have access to our imagination. We just don't have access to our potential of abilities. But we can still connect with our third eye. We can still connect with our imagination, and we can still practice enough that we become intuitive